This is September 9th, 2003, and we are visiting with Virginia Hayter. And Virginia has been in the Schaumburg Township Halton Estates area for quite a few years.
1962.
1962.
May.
Virginia, I would just like a little background first. What was your maiden name?
My maiden name was Kubit, K-U-B-I-T.
And where were you born?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
And where were you educated? And what was your education?
My education, I was trained as a nursery school teacher and have a certificate for that from the University of Maryland. After I finished high school in Pennsylvania, in Thurmont, which is now, they call it Camp David, I gave a year's service to my church, which is Church of the Brethren, and worked in the migrant camps in Florida and set up nursery schools and migrant camps. And then when I finished with the year, came up here to visit a friend because I was interested in going into psychiatric nursing. I had been precluded from going to Alderson, the federal women's prison, by Mr. Hoover because he had a dossier on me. At the age of 16, I picketed the State Department, and I was hustled into a car by 2 FBI, and the dossier started then because I was, my church is a peace church, a traditional peace church, and we were upset with Dean Atchison, who had a very hard line about people going to prison rather than serving an alternative service. And so we were making a comment that war is bad, we need other alternatives. I lived near New Windsor, Maryland, which is the World Church Service Center. My mother had been an interpreter for people coming through after the Second World War. And she spoke Russian and several of the Slavic tongues. And so when the Kalmyks came through, who had been persecuted in Russia, she helped resettle them, etc. So that there was a whole dossier. And when I applied to spend my year at Alderson, they refused. And that was kind of funny because my stepfather had clearance from Admiral Nimitz because he was a metallurgical engineer. And he was part of the team that brought the British turbines over and perfected it, which made the jet engines possible. So it was kind of ironic. On one side of the family was okay, the other side of the family wasn't okay. So my first public service in that sense, when I got to Florida, was the first weekend I tackled the bureaucracy. And we had a woman who was dying of cancer. She had cancer of the colon and had eaten away part of her spine, and she was in the last stages, and because she was poor, they did not want to put her in the hospital, and I bathed her and cleaned her up, and all she could do was, because she was in so much pain, was to cry and cry out Jesus' name and pray. You could see the cancer it was sizzling by that time. In that later stages, it sizzles, it crackles. And I went to the manager of the migrant camp, and I told him if he didn't get her in a hospital, I was going to get to the governor. When I get mad, that's one that moves me. I'm very calm and quiet about most things, but when I get mad, then I move. And when I move, I get deadly.
Look out.
Yeah. You've gotten me to the point where I was. Typical Russian. I was born in Cleveland. I've never seen my dad. He and my mother divorced before I was born. And so I grew up with my mom and her sister and my grandfather. And then when my mother remarried, we moved all over the country. So by the time that I graduated from high school, we were in Maryland. That was the 14th school that I had been in. 14 when we went, because I changed my senior year and went to Pennsylvania. And then went off to school for 2 years and got my certificate, as I said, in nursery education. At that time, you could do a 2-year. Then when I came up here to Chicago, my friend was at Elgin. She was working in Elgin, and
When was that?
1953. And the conditions there were so bad. The
Yeah,
kids.
working in Elgin, you mean the state hospital?
Yes, the state
The
mental.
state
center.
mental.
Yes. And so I thought, well, maybe what I would do is work at our hospital, and our hospital was Bethany, the old Bethany right on Congress. We had a seminary there. In the seminary, after 1968, when we had machine guns on the roof during the riots, we decided that we needed to move. So they went out to Oak Brook. And then 2 years ago, they moved to Richmond, Indiana, because the Oak Brook land became so
Valuable.
It was time to move on. So I decided to stay in Chicago and moved into a fellowship house on Adams Street. And that was for young professionals and people who were going to school and working, so that we had house parents, etc. And I was the youngest one in the house at the time, and they always never let me forget that. And
Okay.
so I worked 3 jobs and saved up enough for school and enrolled in the University of Illinois. Took some math courses, and in the process of that, got a job with CNA Insurance.
And this was University of Illinois, Chicago campus?
Yeah, Chicago campus. And they paid for some more math courses. But I never finished because I got married the following year. But that summer was interesting. A couple of kids had been in a car, and their parents were in Michigan picking fruit, and the car overheated. And there happened to be a Life magazine person in the area, and they did an expose about the growers' inhumanity to migrant people. And so the growers, in order to save their skins, put out a call to the people that knew anything about child care. And we literally, I was hired for that summer, and we literally cleaned out chicken coops to make nurseries for children. And I did my thing again.
And this was in Chicago?
No, Berrien County.
Berrien County.
In
Michigan.
Michigan, yeah. And then I came back to Chicago and got a rather good job in the actuarial department of CNA Insurance.
Without a degree?
Without a degree. So I met my husband.
And your husband's name?
Was Walter John Hayter. He was English. He had come to the United States when he was in his teens from Newport Lawn.
And that would be about when?
Let's see.
When did he come? About?
He was born. Let's see. He came about 1924, 25.
Okay.
He was much older than I. And on a dare, he took me out. You know, typical women, they're not real smart when they're young. Nobody should get married before they're 30. Okay. And so here was this guy, and I worked for the department. He was a Sears buyer.
Okay.
He was very bright, but I didn't realize that he wasn't wealthy.
Was this when?
The rumor was he had a very nice car, and the rumor was that the comptroller of the company used to call him up and say, "For God's sake, cash your paychecks, will you? We want to clear out the books." So everybody considered him quite well-to-do. Well, it wasn't that he was well-to-do; he was real smart. What he did was he went back home to the farm in Indiana every weekend on a Friday, stayed in bed, had his mother serve his meals on Saturday and Sunday in bed, and then his parents would load the car with produce from the farm, and he never ate any. He didn't know what beef was unless it was beef tenderloin, because that's all they fed him. I mean, he was so spoiled it was not funny, and I didn't find this out until after we got married.
Oh, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Now you have to.
I have a secret to tell you.
Yeah, right.
That was the beginning of the Warner Brothers shows.
Yeah.
My in-laws were absolute angels. My mother-in-law was so shy it was not funny. And it was, when we visited her the first time, it was like 4 hours before she came out of her bed.
Oh,
She was that shy.
That's shy.
Yes, that shy. And
Really?
In fact,
Someone in her own
the family
house?
story. The family story is, I mean, there were a couple of good ones, but one of the family stories was that years ago when they had moved into the farm, 5 brothers immigrated because they were related to the Lord Hayter, but they were so far removed that there was no chance of getting any land. And my husband's father was a sergeant major in the British Army, and he had been in India, and he had supported himself by playing double whist, which is double contract bridge.
Not a dummy here. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
yeah. And so when he came back, there was quite a bit of money, but England was in bad shape, and because it started before our '29 crash. So the family decided to, the boys decided to come, and they all bought good land, river bottom land in and around the port. And so they became farmers because that's what they had been
right.
before. His mother was a city gal, and they came. My mother-in-law came from 23, and my father-in-law came from 13. So they were
Huge families.
Yeah, huge families, and typical English. They named their sons in succession, you know. And there are some funny stories about what happened with the cousins, but that's what happened. So we got married, and we lived right on the edge of Columbus Park, where the Greek church is, and I'll think of it in a minute. Where Loretta Hospital is.
Okay.
Okay, that's where and we had an apartment, a 2-flat. And my first shock about, I mean, I didn't really react to women's lib until that first shock. And I was taking classes at Pope's Cooking School down on Michigan Boulevard. And it was raining very badly one night, and I said to Walter, my new husband of some months, could I please have the keys to the car? And he said, what car? And I said, the car that's sitting out in front, that new Mercury. And he said, that's not our car, that's my car. And I said, what do you mean it's my car? And he said, cars don't like more than one person handling them. So I will be driving the car. Now, he was talking to somebody who had a chauffeur's license from Florida, who had an Ohio license, who had an Illinois license, and who had taken the first driving class out of the University of Maryland, where it was inaugurated.
He's saying that you can't drive your car.
Yeah. Okay? So that was the first thing. And you have to understand Englishmen. Englishmen are more stubborn than anybody in the world. More than anybody in the world. And I'm Russian, so I know. I mean, we did Stalingrad, but the English are worse. But they're different. We get mad and then we cool down. Englishmen just laugh about everything. So you can't have a real argument with an Englishman because they just sit there and laugh at you. So you have to pick and choose your fights.
When'd you get a car?
really have to.
When'd you get a car?
When I became mayor, because I wanted a motorcycle, and they said, no motorcycle. I said, well, all I want to do is tool around.
What kind
the
of motorcycle
neighborhood.
did you want
I
to
just
get?
wanted this real simple
Oh,
one, just to
like a
tool around.
scooter?
Yeah, just tool around to look and see what's going on in the neighborhoods, okay? And they said, no. So I got a Chevrolet, the smallest one at the time. I've forgotten what they call it, but that's what I did. And that's what I tooled around in. But
So how did you get to where you wanted to go when you wanted to borrow a car?
walked or
Well, you could take the...
No. Well, we stayed there, and I got involved in the school system, in the Chicago school system. And the first woman on the board was Lois Malice. And her goal was to educate parents. And the Carnegie Institute at that time had a wonderful curriculum called Parenthood in a Free Nation. And she set up through the PTAs classes using this curriculum. And we were trained. And if they used it now, I think it would help because it set community standards. What do we expect of children? What do we expect of parents? How do we interact as citizens, etc. It's a wonderful curriculum.
Very basic.
Yes, extremely basic, but it helps settle down a school.
Right.
And I saw the value of that, so I was trained in that. So that was my first PTA experience. So I had my first child, girl, Stephanie, and then we had our second child. And when we had our second child, I said, you really need a house, because I had lived in a house from the time that my mother married the second time. Anyways, she married a Middle Easterner, and he considered me an appendage that was not wanted.
You just happened to come with them.
Yeah, well, my mother's standard observation was, I only took you because your father didn't want you. And then I got this stepfather, who later on proved to be one of the kinds of men that abuse women. That's one of the reasons I left home after I got a bit of education. And I would never take my children, my female children, to visit him. I just would not. My mother understood, because in order to stay with him, he used to go to France and pick up Valium for her. So by the time she was in her late 50s, her brain was totally fried. And she committed suicide to get away from him. That's how, So I have seen the whole gamut of what happens.
Right.
If you think there are no options, okay.
Now then you had Stephanie.
And then I had Brian.
And you had Brian. And
By that time, we needed yard, even though the park was across the street, etc.
But why Hoffman Estates?
Well, we began looking, and I had certain criteria. What I had done when we got married was I set aside so much money a month, and that was for the house. So at that point in time, Gene still talks about it, the salesman. He says, "You're the only woman I ever know that came back at least 8 times, and when you finally made the decision, plunked down half in cash."
Now this was Gene who?
I'll think of his last name. He was the salesman for Hoffman Homes. Anyways, we went shopping in the various suburbs. My husband had been transferred from the Arlington store out to Melrose Park, so we were coming west, okay? And I think we made the same decision that a lot of people did, Lavon. We liked the house. The builders seemed to be responsible. The area at that point in time, that Hoffman Homes did a couple of things that other builders did not do, okay? One of the things that they did was they were foresightful enough to recognize that flood control was their responsibility. So they put in the retention funds. And I saw the environmental output of that, and I said, that's a builder who's responsible. The other thing that happened was I investigated the school system, and they had contributed to each of the schools up until the time when Hillcrest was built, which is now Lincoln Prairie. They had given land, and they had built the schools.
Right.
But Hillcrest was the first school where they gave land and money and let the school district take over. So if you saw Bob Plum, you know that Robert told you that was the case. When we moved out here, the interesting thing that happened was the school board met at the newest school. It was their tradition to always meet so the school board met at my school. And our PTA had, I think, some pretty neat people. Phyllis Seaver. And Phyllis and I connected, and she said, you know, we don't have any libraries. There's no, and now they're called media centers, but we just wanted a library in the school.
Because all we had in the classroom was one shelf of books.
Yes.
A single shelf of books.
Yes.
That was
And so our goal was to create librarians.
Yes.
And we cleaned out closets, and we started in on raising the money and making sure.
Well, how did you get involved in the PTA? I'm going to backtrack just a little bit.
Well, because Stephanie she was in first grade when we moved out here. And we moved in May 1962. There were no sidewalks. There was no front lawn. And in fact, she laughingly says that she knows there are at least 2 pairs of shoes, which I admit stuck in the clay someplace.
Probably many more than that.
before the topsoil came back. And so she went there, and of course I supported that. I got involved in the PTA because I had been in the city of Chicago. And then the Scouts, the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts,
Well,
did all of that.
we're forgetting that you also became an officer in the PTA. Another stepping stone.
Yeah, I did.
President, if I remember correctly.
But there were, I got involved also in the Women's Club and became the Community Improvement Chairman and took around the petitions to create the Park District, which they have conveniently forgotten right now. And I mean, number one, I cannot criticize. They absolutely don't understand constructive criticism. They have not. But I long ago understood that. They are jocks. And that's why we have the kind of park district we do.
It's based on athletics.
Yes. Yeah, they don't understand. And now they're getting some people who are saying, well, there's got to be more than this. And once in a while, if we poke hard enough, I mean, we did save the Vogelei barn and the house. But that took everybody, you know, coming, and me staying way out of the backside and just giving people information or technique. No, I did not physically, no, I knew better than that. But we did do that. The community improvement to people at that time, we raised money, and, you know, the tennis courts that are over there by Lakeview School, that was our first project, the tennis courts. And then we put the bicycle racks and stuff over by the old pool. Okay, that used to be on Gannon Drive. And we kind of did things that we thought would improve the community. One of the reasons why the Park District was formed, though, was because the village was up against the limit in that constitution that said you could only have 5% indebtedness, bonded indebtedness, so that if you had to build a village hall or you had to build a public works building, you'd have enough money left over to do any capital improvements. So that's why you see the combination of park districts disassociated from communities. I think that in maturity that may come back and be redone or rethought about. I think it needs to be, but I think there needs to be a totality of thinking. And so that's what I did. I attended the school board meetings, all male. And then one
Probably
female.
with her hat and gloves on.
Yes, I always wore a hat those years, and gloves.
And gloves.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And your purse at your wrist, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Very much the lady. And how do I know that? It's because at the PTA meetings, the teachers had to sit in the front row, right in front of the PTA board. And I can remember. Mrs.
I had some
Hayter-
whoppers too. Some hats. I mean,
she did. They were marvelous.
Yeah, I used to enjoy
I wish you had some of them.
I think I could recreate some of them, but I still have the big ones.
Okay.
A couple of the big ones I have.
I'm sorry, I'm off track
It's
here.
okay, no. And
School board.
so I observed the school board. And then Ellie Thorson got elected. And then the decision about where to put the first junior high came up. Now, any rational person, at least I thought rational, would have taken a look at the demographics and would have said, we don't want to bus these children all over the place. We want them to be, the majority of them, to walk to school. Now you have to remember, Campanelli came later than Hoffman Homes. You want me to go into that? Because I
Sure. Well, wherever you want to. You're doing something.
Let me
Who's gonna
finish
know
our
this better than you?
sojourn through. And so I was dumbfounded when they decided to put the first junior high where Frost is. And I said, that's in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't have city water. It doesn't have anything. And the kids will have to be bused, or the parents, if they have after-school activities, will have to get them there. Now, in those days, we did not have second cars. A lot of people didn't have second cars. They just didn't have it. Okay, so we paid, like my house was $23,000 because it had an extra garage. And it was a 2-story colonial. Okay, and I paid half cash. So we had a decent mortgage. But my husband was in he was almost 51 when we moved in. So, I mean, you didn't get a 30-year mortgage without a big increase. And I wasn't going to pay that interest. If anybody was going to Florida, I was.
Oh, well, I guess that's not in the schedule.
No, not right now, at least.
Anyways, so I just was so angry about the decision to put that down. First of all, I thought it was unfair. It was illogical. It was unfair to both the parents and the children, because if the children had a desire to stay after school for whatever reason, they just couldn't do it. Now they did make an allowance if you were on any of the athletic teams, which meant that they had one goal: athletes were okay, but everybody else, tough luck.
And who were the athletes? The boys.
Right. So that's okay. That's all right. And I was really incensed about that. And one day I got a call, and every community has these. These are people who sit back and they want the best for the community, but they don't want to personally go out and do that. But they look for people that they can sponsor. And so I got a call from a couple of people who were involved in the PTA, and they said, we think you should run for school board. And I said, oh no, I'm not ready. If I can, I need a lot of homework, etc. And he said, no. We'll manage the campaign. We'll do it. And I said, no, I need to. So I put up some money. I forgot what it was, a couple $100, I think. Because, and I had some cash by that time, because when I moved out here, I was still doing demonstrations for women's groups. And I would come and demonstrate bread making or hors d'oeuvres or anything. And I had gone to St. Hubert's women's group and done this. And one day, a couple months later, I got this panic-stricken call from this woman, and she said, you've got to help me out. You really must. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Who are you? And she introduced herself, and she said, I met you at St. Hubert's women's group. And she said, I know you do fabulous hors d'oeuvres. And she said, my husband's left me. I have 4 children. One of them has childhood diabetes. And she said, I've got to make a goal. And she said, I sold myself to the Holiday Inn, which was the closest one, over there on Algonquin Road, and used to be owned by people who owned the Bears. And they used to come down from part of them came down from Michigan. And so she said, you've got to help me out because I need somebody to make hors d'oeuvres. And I said, well, I'm not coming over there, that's for sure. And she said, well, I can send the truck back, the station wagon back and forth. So I used to stay up at night and make hundreds and thousands of hors d'oeuvres.
And make money.
And well,
Some.
some. You didn't make a lot those
Right.
days, but I made enough to keep me, going, and to buy the extras that I wanted for the kids, and so I had some money, some pin money, and once in a while they would come down and I'd do the fancy baking and in those days the kinds of molds. We did chiffon molds and all of the things that people like on buffet tables. And weddings, I do weddings and stuff. And so I won. And Ellie mentored me. Now Ellie's style was quite different than my style, quite different. And Ellie was going to school, so she became a professional educator, and eventually wasn't she the reading specialist in '54?
Yes.
Where did
So
she go to school?
she Northern. She finished at Northern, but she had been a Boston University person, so she was good. So she saw it from the educator's standpoint, and I saw it from the practical. This is how parents view you.
It was a good balance, really.
Yeah, and we got along famously and got to know Ellie and Sig, and in fact, when they had a funeral for Sig in Roselle a couple of months ago when he died, and they asked me to say a few words downstairs, and but what had happened was there wasn't much going on in the suburbs, but there was a theater group. And it was a fabulous theater group. You remember?
Yes, yes.
But the problem was that if you belonged to the theater group, it was a little scandalous because they had a different set of mores than the rest of us, okay? And we heard about the parties, okay? Well, it just so happened that some years later, Sig divorced Ellie, and he married one of his friends from the theater group.
That was
Sue.
nice.
Yeah, Sue. And in the ensuing years, we've all matured, and when one of the kids got up at Sig's funeral, she said, my mother and my stepmother go out to dinner every Friday. And they like each other. They just couldn't live with my father.
I love it.
It was so delicious. That was one of the times when I thought to myself that we've finally come full circle.
Yeah.
That the women can reconnect again no matter what happens. And that was touch and go for a few years because I know Ellie was bitter. It's rightfully so. Yeah. But she's gone through that, And so we were all having ice cream downstairs, and they said, "Well, what do you?" And that's it. I told them just exactly what he said. You were very risque those years.
Yeah.
But anyway, so those years were tough years for the school district because with the growth of both Schaumburg and Hoffman, we were needing a classroom every 30 days.
Were the builders still providing land and money per?
Camping began that way, but you have to understand that Asher was an impediment. It was a big impediment. Maggie was an absolute wonderful person. In fact, I just sent her. They did the Herald had a article about the house that they used to live in.
Right.
So I clipped it out. And sent it to Maggie. And in fact, yesterday in the mail, when I got home, I opened the mail late, and this little note from Maggie. "Oh, thanks for the clipping." She said it was so good, and so she chatted a little bit. We never told Maggie what an SOB he was, and he could be a SOB of spectacular proportions. Because he decided that he was right, and that anybody that stood in his way needed to be killed. That is exactly his temperament. He was a Southerner with a mean streak in it. Okay, could be gracious when he was on as a performer, but when you sat across from him at a negotiating table, it was an entirely different thing. If you didn't bring battleships and could kill him, he wasn't reasonable.
So you always needed the trump card.
Yeah, if you were going to see it.
Play.
Yeah, if you were going to play, yeah. The two things that I remember mostly was we set up the school boards. We had a couple more enlightened people that joined us, and younger, so that we weren't into just the farmers on the board anymore. We had people who had professional backgrounds, etc.
By the time you were on the school board, I don't think there were any farmers on the board.
One. By the time I got in. And so what we did was we used to call it our yelling and screaming committee. And what we did was we would go to zoning board hearings or plan commission meetings. We had no standing. At that point, the school districts had no standing to demand anything. So we had to persuade by whatever means. Usually we had a rational approach to why we were saying that we needed this and we needed that. And sometimes we were successful, but we were not very successful. And in fact, the gentleman who was longtime business manager,
Jim Bowen?
No. After Jim, Marv has produced a couple of, and I know they're in the archives in '54, a couple of analyses of who gave what to the school district in money and schools and land. And you'll see it's far outweighed by what Hoffman did in relationship to anything else. And that was because he was very blunt about it. In fact, I hit my head that night when I was so upset. Atcher simply said he did not believe it was a responsibility of the village to look out for the school district. The second time, it wasn't a battle, but the second time was a discussion after I became mayor about merging the two communities. And I went to see him and I said to him, from a political standpoint, the two communities merged could be, and I said, we won't even discuss names, keep the name. We don't care about that. But we do care about political power in Springfield. And I said, we desperately need to have some clout. And I said, if we merged, we'd have that kind of clout right now instead of waiting for it to happen. And he said, and I said, what could we do? And he leaned back in his chair, I remember it so well, and he said to me, you will bring me a totally debt-free community. And I said, but Bob, what do you... And he said, I want all of the roads redone so that there will be no expenditures for at least 20 years on roads. And I looked at him and I said, well, first of all, Bob, we bought the water company. We can't pay that off. That's a long-term debt, and you know that. And he still had Citizens Utilities at the time. Okay, they were battling to get out because we had opened. Because what Frank Chino did was the first time that a utility had to open its books so that you paid fair market value, and not what they said was fair market value. So that's how we had bonds out on that. And I said, there's no way. Mm-hmm. And I said, you have older streets. What is going on here? And he said, I don't care. Those are my conditions. You don't need those conditions. Forget it. The one time that I did support him, okay, and that was when Fred Downing was mayor. Fred said to me, I can't go to this meeting because Fred worked downtown. And he said, I want you to go. And so I went over to the Arlington Hotel. I think it was the Hilton at the time. I don't remember what it was. It was the middle 70s. And the meeting had been called by NIPSI, Northeast Illinois Planning Commission. And their discussion was centered around the idea of Woodfield. So Mr. Atcher made the presentation about Woodfield. And everyone in the area was around a very large conference table. Now, I had just come out from the school district, so I saw this potential for money, and I'm going like, I can't say anything negative. But NIPSI had a few comments. They weren't negative, they were just probing. And they said, first of all, your long-term problem will be transportation. And how will you solve that? Because you need to solve it now and not later. And Andrew just waved his hand and he said, oh, we don't have a problem with that. Everybody has cars. Okay. And then we discussed revenue sharing. Because at that point, Minnesota had enacted a bill that has a regional planning group, and if you put any large regional retail operation in your town, you get a proportion of it, but the surrounding communities have a formula and they all get a share in that tax. So I thought that was a marvelous idea, and I said, you know, it's location, location, location. He's got the location guys. I said, and I can't say anything about transportation because Hoffman Estates is 5 miles equidistant from each of the railroads, so I can't bring transportation to the table. And I said, from a school standpoint, it's going to be a bonanza for the schools. So I said, I'm not suggesting that we say no to it. And I came back and said that to Fred. I said, Fred, we can't. I said, just stay back. If he gets battled, he'll get battled by somebody else. But so I went to Giddy Dyer, who was a state legislator in Springfield, and I said to Giddy, I said, Giddy, would you do me a favor? I said, would you take this? I had gotten the Minnesota statute, and I said, take this and see how it flies in Springfield. Well, you would have thought that I was the devil incarnate. Giddy was a game lady, and she put it through. And of course, those who understood the realities of what was happening in the suburban area supported it, but it wasn't big enough. And Hatcher had hired some pretty good lobbyists, and there was a battle. And one night I remember we were someplace for dinner. I had to stay down, and drinks appeared at the table, and I did not drink, and I'll explain why. And somebody at the table said, where did those come from? And the waiter said, the gentleman over in the corner said, he's sending drinks from the haves to the have-nots. And that's been perpetuated in people's minds for a long time. We used to go and people would say, oh yeah, you're the town that's surrounded by Schaumburg. And literally that might have been true, because I went back in the history, and the people who have this, what you need to do is go over to South Barrington. The clerk in South Barrington has a whole group of clipping books. And in that, they have all of the history of the strip annexations that were done by Schaumburg and Hoffman, and how the Barringtons battled that. I didn't realize that Schaumburg had gone all the way up Barrington Road with annexations. Really? Yeah. I mean, they have history that I never knew up till I went, and I'm going, what? So there was a battle over who was getting what land early on. But you need to go over there, because they are the only clippings I have ever seen are in their books.
Who is this?
The South Barrington village clerk has
Village clerk
of South Barrington.
Yeah. So we built. What we did was we went to the state, and the state created a state building commission, and they loaned us the money to build the buildings. Now you have to remember that these buildings were basic, very basic. We didn't get any frills. I mean, what Legat does these days just goes on and go like, I think we're overbuilding a couple of them. Mm-hmm. You know, those pillars and all that stuff are a little bit much for me. But they're the Prince builders. They like to make it look like, you know, and they're top of the heap when it comes to money too. I mean, you're paying good money to them. Anyways, we built the buildings and tried to keep up. The other issue that we had was we came upon the numbers of remedial children at 3rd and 4th grade in reading. And he said, there's something wrong with this. And so I looked back into my own history and I thought, I know what it is. We don't have kindergarten. So what's happening in this
And
community,
this was about
those
60.
yeah, 67, 68. We don't have kindergarten. And what's happening is those of us who feel that that is important put out private money and sent them to private kindergartens. Mrs. Swanson had her school over there in the old schoolhouse, just off of the intersection now of where the tollway crosses. In fact, I went to her husband's funeral a few years ago. She's still around. Yeah.
Is she?
Yeah. And so we had children entering that were, they couldn't, there was no reason other than they didn't have that start. That some of the, so they were coming in uneven. It wasn't a level playing field in 1st grade. And so we said, okay, we got to do kindergarten. And people, no, we can't afford kindergarten. We can't do this. We can't do that. And so we managed to bring them in for 2 hours a day, and the numbers of remedial readers went down. And so the next issue would have been for me the junior highs, because I think that we have still not really done a good job about integrating junior high and high school. 211 has a tracking system. That is a tracking system, though they won't admit it at all. All right, and that initial test that you take puts you in a track, and to get out of that track is like your parents have to threaten to burn down a school. I mean, it's that bad. And the kids know it. And the reason that I know the kids know it, I think it was my son, my first son. I took the kids to their, I was driving them to their test. And the kids were talking among themselves about, well, do you think we really should do our best? Because if we get in the top, then we'll be the top, but nobody knows that when you go to college that you were in the top of the top. But if you get in the 2nd tier and you really make a showing, now you know.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, the kids strategize. They knew.
And they're 8th graders.
It was easier to get an A out of the 2nd group than an A out of the 1st group. I mean, they knew this, and I'm going, this has got to stop. This is wrong. And then the articulation between 211 and Harper was not what it should be. So that would have been my next. But during the course of one of the meetings in Hoffman at one of the zoning hearings, I was leading that particular yelling and screaming evening. And the gentleman who was the attorney for the developer took me out in the hallway, and he said to me very bluntly, he said, Mrs. Hayter, what would it take to make you happy?
Ooh.
And I said, what did you say? And he said it again. And I stomped off. I said, don't you ever come here again. And I walked back in, and I said to my friends, I said, there's something going on here, and I don't know what it is, but it's bad. And shortly after that, there had been an election, and shortly after that, well, one of my PTA friends who lived 2 blocks from me, and who I told her, I said, Marge, you do not want to get involved in the politics of this town. I'm telling you that they are all centered at St. Hubert's, and it is a closed corporation. And there's something, I don't know what it is, but you get the deal. And Marge said, oh, no, that's just, you know. And Marge called me up one night, and she said, we're moving out of town. We're going to Indianapolis. You're right, and that's all I'm going to say. And hung up the phone.
Oh, my gosh.
And I'm going, wow. So I thought, well, what in the world could this be? And did not know what it was until a few years later. It's kind of sat there for a while. The general tenor of the homeowners associations, and we had quite a few homeowners associations, was that the decisions being made were not good for the long-term health of the community. And the breaking point was one point in time where the decisions at the village board, we had about, on the drawing boards, we had 4,500 single-family homes. Okay, not all built, but zoned. And in a 3-month period, they zoned 10,000 multiple units. 10,000. People don't remember what I had to do. Why I was called the Wicked Witch of the West was because I said no and renegotiated almost everything. Yeah. That did it for most of us, because 10,000 units would have broken the back of the school district. So I went to Wayne, and I had just been...
That would,
I
the
was
whole
just-
tenor of the
town,
community.
that's correct. So I went to Wayne.
Would have
and-
affected Schaumburg too.
Oh, yeah, the whole
I
area.
went to Wayne and I said to Wayne, Wayne, I feel that I have to do something that will benefit the school district, but I won't be able to come back. And I said, I've got 2 more years of the second 3 years of here. And I said, give me some counsel. Can I better serve the school district staying on the school board or running for the village board? And he said, I don't want to say this, but I have to run for the village board. He said, there is. And he said, the rumors are rampant, but I don't know. And I said, fine. So the group was very entrenched. And those of us who were Republican, the man who had preceded me as school board president was Fred Downey. He was a really brilliant guy. Really. Not much people skills.
No?
Not much people
No.
skills, but brilliant.
Yes, I agree.
And we were affiliated with the Republican Party, and so we went to the chairman of the party and said, "Will you support a group of people who will run for the village board?" And he said, "Well, we'll see whether or not the community will do that." So that was born, the caucus at the high school. And what happened was, in those days, if you were running, the Sunday afternoon would be picked out. All the people who wanted to be slated would have the opportunity to speak. All the Republicans in the town, in the states, would be invited, and they would sit in their precincts, okay, with their precinct captain. They'd listen to the presentations, and then there'd be an Australian ballot about who should run. And I thought it was very democratic, with a little d, and I thought it worked well. I would like to see that happen again, because but only now that it's nonpartisan, we do a nonpartisan kind of thing, and let's see what comes out of that. Anyways, Fred was slated as mayor, and I as one of the trustees, and then Mr. Hennessy was one of the, and Bruce Lind was the other. And Bruce and Marilyn and I knew each other through PTA and scouting and stuff like that. And Bruce was a banker, so we had, Fred was a CPA, and Hennessy was a business person, but now he teaches at, or he did teach at Harvard. He's physics and the physical sciences. And we ran, and we won. And when we got in there, we discovered that there were very few business practices. And Fred looked at me and he said, I can't spend the time here. We had no professional person at the helm. They had hired a village manager for a short period of time, Mr. Appleby, but he departed because he wanted a little more authority than the village board would give him. And Fred and I looked at each other and said, we can't run this thing. So we began to look for a village manager. The manager at that point in time was by ordinance and not by referendum as it is now. And he said, in the meantime, you're going to be Public Works Chairman. And I'm going, Public Works Chairman? I said, they have sewer and water and streets and all that. He said, yeah, and you're going to learn a lot. Well, one of the reasons he did that was because 3 months after we got elected, we could not get water to the top of the Hilldale condominiums.
Oh, that's not good.
Oh, it was not good because we had human feces on our doorstep.
Yes.
Very irate citizens.
I can imagine.
And what we discovered was they had not appropriately planned for water storage. They had not appropriately planned for water production. Even though they had bought the water company, they knew absolutely nothing about it. We had engineers who were, and so we had some problems right away. Now the rationale given for the 10,000 units being zoned was that if we wanted to do the roads, we could take the MFT, the motor fuel tax funds that the state gives us, and we wouldn't have to give anything over to these people in the condominiums, in the apartments, because they had private roads. So we could use that money. Well, that might have been good, but they would have had to have 50,000 multiple units to make the numbers work. I mean, they were atrocious. They did. I always say to the classroom students that come to talk, that I talk to, I said, there are sins of omission and there are sins of commission. And sometimes the former are worse than the latter. Only people don't look at that way.
Right.
They don't get hung for what they didn't do.
Right.
But they should.
Right.
But they should. So that's how I got my baptism. And I learned real quick about water and sewer and streets, etc. And we worked as a team. Those years we really did. There was so much to do, I think, that we had, and we respected each other. I don't see a lot of respect now. I don't see respect for the citizens. I used to tell Wayne, I'd say, Wayne, stop it. You're being sick. You don't understand. Because he would talk about the demands of the parents. And I'd say, Wayne, wait a minute. That's a sign of success. We've got more educated parents. They want a higher standard. That's what we're here for. I said, that's why we get elected. We're supposed to solve problems, not make them. And so I've always said to the managers as they've complained about it, and I said, wait a minute. You're supposed to be able to solve them. Stop belly aching, Go solve them. And I think a lot of politicians don't understand it either. I am constantly amazed at some of what's coming down the pike, because they think that they think that government started the day they got elected. Okay.
Yeah.
And they don't know what questions. They think the question to ask is, can it be done? That's the first question. The second question is, should it be done? And the second question is very much more important than the first question. Because you can find somebody who can say it can be done, and you can find somebody to whore anything. Okay? But, so that we worked on water. That's why water was always important to us. We worked on making sure that we had adequate open space. The Park District was never satisfied with it, but it's the mentality of people who think that somebody else should give something to them, and if you get into that mentality, it becomes self-fulfilling. And that's sad, because unlike Schaumburg's Park District, who just goes out and does, ours constantly bellyaches about everything.
And sometimes Schaumburg taxpayers would like Schaumburg Park District to slow down a little bit.
Well, I wasn't going to say that.
I live there.
You didn't ask me that
I
question,
paid the
and I don't comment. You know what the rule is? Don't comment about somebody else's problems. Let them comment themselves
Yes.
or their constituency.
I've done it more than
Once in a while,
Yeah.
I will do it if you ask.
We just
If
want
you
people
ask.
to know this is real life.
If you ask, that's the way I play it with my board. If you've been trustee for 4 years and then mayor, and then have a 4-year out of office sojourn and then come back, I wear 2 hats. I wear an elected official's hat, but I also wear a department head's hat. And I'm very careful about the trustees and the mayor know. If you ask me a direct question, I will answer it. But I am not running to you and telling you all the tales out of school. And that's why I think I have a good relationship with the other department heads and with the managers that I've served with. Because we have, and if you're not smart enough to know what the question is, well, you'll figure it out. Sooner or later, because it'll come up and hit you right in the forehead.
Well, I'm going to take a step back and just away from Hoffman Estates not really out of Hoffman Estates, but back a little bit. I'm going to say the name Rainbow Inn.
Rainbow Inn was on the corner, the southwest corner of Roselle and Higgins.
Correct.
Now you have to remember, when I moved out here, there were no stoplights at all. And that was the first stoplight in the whole area at that corner.
I remember the Rainbow Inn.
And the Rainbow Inn was the place where you got pizza and beer.
Right.
And kind of, and had your hair cut next door.
Right.
Well, the gal who got me into the business of hors d'oeuvres was the same person who said one day, I want to open up a restaurant. And I'm going, oh my God.
That's how you got
Yes.
into this.
And she said, I've got the money and I've got a partner. And she said, and I've got a location. So I said, okay.
And
We went over to take a look. And it was a mess. It was a bloody mess. And I said to her, you really want to do this, don't you? She said, yes, I need more money. The kids are getting to be teenagers. And she said, I'm not, she said, I'm gonna shoot it and see what comes up. And I said, okay. Well, I had kids who were coming into that same age range, and I thought, put the kids to work. Her kids, my kids,
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we did. We opened up the restaurant called Captain's Cove. And it was an 80-hour work week. And the kids all worked. And we had 120 seating. We turned it over twice on Saturday nights. I remember that. But we didn't have a liquor license because I couldn't, as an elected official, have a liquor license. So we kept the Greeks had the bar,
okay.
and there was a pass-through from there. So we did that for a while, and then my husband had his stroke and became incapacitated. And when he was in the hospital at Northwest, I said to him, do you still want me to go on with running for mayor? And he said, yeah. We were in the process of building the one on Gannon. And Bruce and I were in charge of that. We built that one. And Bruce would say, you got to go. The reason Bruce was top dog was because the architects that we had were of the kind that I sometimes had when we were building schools, and that was they didn't want a woman on site. And they didn't want a woman to say yes or no to them. So oftentimes, and then when I saw that, when we hired those architects, I said to Bruce, you're going to be the point person, I'll tell you what I think, and you go tell them. I said, because they don't like women. And so that's how we managed the one on Cannon Drive. The thing that broke the camel's back was he sent out a letter announcing his re-election bid, and he assessed businesses X number of dollars. And of course the bank got one for $5,000, and the banker called me up, and the bank on Roselle Road at the time, called me up and said, what in the world is this? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, Fred sent me this note, this letter that says he's done such a marvelous job with the village and that he should be reelected, and my assessment is $5,000. I said, you've got to be kidding. Stop joking. And he said, no, I'm bringing the letter over. So he did.
Wow.
And it made me furious. I mean, we had run as a team, and I felt that he had betrayed not only the team, but me personally, because I had,
You were
I
attached
didn't
to it.
work. So I was the one who made the decisions, day-to-day decisions. If the electricity went out in the old village hall, yes, the electrician should be called. If something, everything came to me during the day. And then at the end of the day, I'd call him and tell him everything that I had done. So, it was, so I got angry, and we sat down, the trustees, the two trustee candidates, and the village clerk didn't want to run again. It was Virginia. And so I said, we got to do something about this. And the committeeman said, well, it's going to have to be done. And I said, yeah, I know it's going to have to be done. So I ran, and I beat him. He took it rather well. Then I got elected, and 12 years later, got unelected.
And then?
So what happened to the restaurant was that when I got to be mayor and didn't have the time, she decided that she would take a job managing Tantera down at Kentucky Lake. And so she built a beautiful home down there and managed, and then a few years ago retired. So she lived out her dream.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely left the area.
Yeah. Yeah. She left the area. So that's what happened there.
And it seems like your interest in politics just naturally evolved.
Yes. I didn't, generally I don't involve myself in something. It's just, I have interests, but I don't like to be out front. I'm not a very good politician because I don't like to work the tables. I think that's an imposition on people's privacy. And I don't like the glad hand. I will go to friends, or I will sit someplace and people will come to me, but I respect people enough to understand that they have something to say. They'll say it. Mm-hmm. They don't have to have me going over, making...
like the sales part of it.
Yeah, I don't like politics. I like government. Everybody knows that. I don't like politics. I like government. And I suppose I got that way primarily out of the 78 campaign when I ran for Cook County Clerk.
Talk about that.
Well, we had been through, the Republican Party had been through some people. In fact, when we had our 15th anniversary, I made, you want to talk about boo-boos. We had our 15th anniversary, and it was a humdinger. We had Lawrence Welk out, to be the dance band, and we just really did it up good. And the TV cameras came out, and we were planting a tree to commemorate that on the.
Now, where did they come out to?
The Gannon Road.
Gannon Road. Okay.
And they said Nixon was in, and I think thinking about running for second term or whatever. It was during Nixon's time, and somebody threw me a ringer and said, "What do you think about Mr. Nixon?" And I said, "Well, sometimes we run dogs." On TV.
Did it actually aired because they didn't save things?
Yes. Yes, it actually aired. It actually aired.
What station was that on?
Remember, we probably had it someplace.
Don't even think about it.
It's probably someplace because there was a special. afternoon or evening program that they did for the suburbs.
Oh, okay.
And I'll think of it after a while. But anyways.
You actually said that?
Oh, yes, I did. And it was
How
true.
fast was it before
It
you
was
realized
true.
that you were on film and that maybe
Oh,
you
no,
shouldn't have?
I immediately understood what I had done. But, I mean, you know, it was a natural reaction to how I literally felt.
She is known for speaking her mind.
Yes. If you really want, if you don't want, don't ask.
Yes.
And sometimes you don't ask and you get it anyways.
So then, how did
Well,
you?
no,
did you-
that we had been through a series of really bad candidates at the county level. And I was naive enough to think that I could do a better job. So I went to our committeeman down Taunton and I said, I think I'd be a better candidate than a lot of people that you've had at the county level. And he laughed and he said to me, he said, okay. He said, we're going to have endorsements next week. He said, you come and make a presentation. So I did. And they slated me. But what they don't tell you is that, first of all, in 1978, in order to come out of the slot even, you would have had to have 42,000 votes, because that's how many workers work for the county in the Forest Preserve District.
Oh, okay.
You had to have 42,000 just off the bat. Never mind their friends and relatives. Secondly, they didn't tell you that each of the 30 township committeemen are kings in their own land. They share nothing, and they want you to stroke them. By the time you get nominated and the election, you have been around stroking nothing but people who will give you the very bare minimum number of votes. You don't have time to go after the independents or the independent thinking Democrats. So that's why we've lost. Because idiots can't share anything. I suggested that they put their mailing lists all together downtown at the office, and that the office manager unlock, share it with us. I knew that I needed a professional. So I asked some people, and they said, well, Senator Dirksen's campaign manager's son is in the business, and he lives in Evanston, and go see Roger Rainville Jr. So I called Roger and made an appointment, and he said, yeah, I'd like to try that. He was working part-time as advance man when anybody came from Washington. So he introduced me to his dad, who had been the campaign manager, and the dad gave some, and Roger said, you know, can you afford me? And I said, what are you? He named me a full-time campaign, and I went, oh my God, I'm pissed. I said, how much will you do if I give you $1,000 a month? He said, I'll give you a day a week. So I said, you're on. So we opened a downtown office, and we opened an office out here, and raised more money than it had ever been raised by anybody. The builders came forward. Abe Fortas, do you remember Abe?
Oh my.
Yeah, he was over. Do you remember when Arlington had the theater?
Yes.
Abe did a theater party for me.
Oh my.
I think I have the pictures of Abe and me together. And we raised considerable amount of money there. And had a good campaign going. Okay? What I didn't realize, nobody told me, was that all the Republicans, suburban Republicans who are on the county board, are compromisers. They do not support Republican candidates. And I was halfway through the election when somebody sat me down and let me know.
Instead of when you first started.
Yeah. I was very, very, very naive. And a lot of committed people, worked hard. And I'll never forget the night that we lost. The driver was a young man who lived in the apartments at Barrington Square, and he said, I can't understand why you lost this and that. But he says, even Stanley Cusper's father-in-law that we met the ex-father-in-law told us what a dirty rat he was. And now you know, shouldn't have happened. And I said, my dear, don't worry about it. I said, at least we did it honorably, and that's all that needs to be said. So, I learned my lesson and never got involved with the county politics again. I think that one of the issues, I did have to address with the city committeeman, the Republican committeeman, the issue of patronage. And I was very honest about it. I said, at the local level, I don't believe it's needed. And our committeeman and I were always at loggerheads about that. You know that Don Totten and I just did not see eye to eye, and I was not giving him. And she double-crossed him when Betty came in. She had promised him patronage, and she didn't give it either. But she didn't give it for another reason, not principle. And I said patronage is a technique that one can use, but it should not be overused. And I said, you don't know everybody in the world when you run an operation that's that large. And you need to have some trusted people that you can trust. And that will hire the kinds of people that will do the job. I don't think they were comfortable with a woman. I just don't think it was 78 was still too early. It was still too early. Because in 73, I was the only female mayor in the suburban area. I was the very first.
And look how many we have now.
Yeah. I tried over the years. I've mentored a lot of them. I mentored Clarine Hall, who was well met, and then Clarine's now the township supervisor for her township. I mentored the Buffalo Grove gal who was a village clerk. She then went on to be mayor, and then she was a state representative. I felt a responsibility because we needed to support each other. And there were years when we had a good telephone. We could call up and somebody would say, this is what I'm experiencing, and what do you think's really happening? And we kind of, I don't think they do that much anymore. I think they're pretty much loners. The state reps do. The women state reps do.
Do you think it comes with age, though? That, a while ago, women didn't have other women that they could even talk to about certain things, and now they're a younger age and they're more
I don't see the
teen.
mayors. I don't see the female mayors having as close a relationship as we did. I think they're more loners than we were.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's because they can afford to be now. They're secure.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have. I mean, they have lived through the time and people have accepted them, so they don't have that to go through. They can devote their energies to really looking at the problems. And they have different problems than we had. I mean, we had massive problems. We had funding problems. We had water problems. I mean, we found radium. They're talking about radium.
Yeah.
We found radium. That's why we went to Lake Michigan water. We found radium in the 70s in our water. And there was no one who was testing, and I found a lab being run by a professor out of Notre Dame, and I said, you're supposed to be the top of the field, and he said, I'll do your testing for you, but he said, I'll tell you what's really wrong. He said, what's really wrong is when they adopted the Clean Water Act, they transferred the guidelines from air radium quality to water. He says, not at all the same. He said, it's stupid. The guidelines are stupid. And he said, we have no data, we have no guidelines, and we have no study going on. And that's when they began the studies. But they knew immediately that the reading was bad, and I knew. And with the help of, if it hadn't been for Chuck Zedek, nobody in this, Schaumburg included, nobody would have Lake Michigan water. Mm-hmm. Because Chuck called up one day.
From Elk Grove Village.
Right. Chuck called up one day and he says, Ginger, he said, I'm setting up a meeting. He said, there are about 9 of us. And he said, I think you should come. And I said, what's it about? And he said, we're about 300 yards from water that we could tap into because we're right next to Chicago. by the airport. And he said, I don't think that that's a really good idea. He said, I think that we need to think in bigger terms. And so I came, and I signed on that night. And we were 9 at that, and then we dropped down to 7, and then we dropped down to 5. But we had all had the deep wells. Well, we had production problems. The deep wells were failing and dropping at 10 feet a year, which meant all the wellheads had to be reset. The radium was in the water. The barium was in the water. We had quite a few things that really... And then at that point in time, we drew sand from one drilling. And it's pretty hard to take. Fortunately, it wasn't our money. We had, at that point, we had always had water production provided by the developer. The developer invested $1.2 million and he drew sand. He was not happy.
So what exactly had to be done to...
There was no way. At that point in time, there are techniques now, they're expensive, but there are techniques where on site you can rid the barium and the radium and not have to go to an alternative supply.
But you didn't do that then?
No. What we did was we decided that the quality of water from let me back up. I had gone into a couple of symposiums in Chicago put on by the head of the water department early on when I was mayor. And I listened, and the guy said something that was really interesting. He said, we have the capacity, and we only use 1/3 of it at that pumping station. And I thought, my God, he's got bonds out on that, and he would really like to sell that water. That's what he's saying, but he can't say that.
Yes.
And this is what station? Where are you talking about?
Navy Pier.
Okay.
The Jardine station.
Okay.
And so I contacted him, and I said, you have capacity? And he said, yeah, we have capacity. So when Chuck called, I said, Chuck, I know they have capacity. And he said, yeah, I heard you talking about it one time. And I said, yeah, I know they have it. And I said, now the issue is how much it's going to cost us and how much we need. Since we were on the far west, we had some different problems than other people did. One, we had, if it broke between here and there, we were out of luck. So we opted to cap some of our wells, and we could put them into production if we need to.
That was my next question.
They can be put into production. They are tested, so we know that the quality and the
You just don't work them now.
That's right. Yeah. I went to South Barrington and I said, I know you don't believe in development, but at some point in time, you may need water. So you may want to go. Each one of us individually had to go to the State Water Survey and ask for an allocation, because the allocation of Lake Michigan water comes through that.
Okay.
And so we had to predict what our population would be. And that's why when we started doing our planning, Mr. Gardner was still in business, and he was probably the premier planner. And he was getting a little tottery, but when we brought him in for Westbury, he said to me, he said after 50,000, you'd have a hard time keeping a community in a community. So you have to work very hard at it. He said, and I just want you to understand this.
Especially with the sprawl.
He said, yeah. And I inherited north and south, and now we got the west. So, it wasn't something, the reason that we have the west is because we had in the middle 60s, Mr. Cortese come out here from Walnut Creek, and he was putting up planned adult communities. And he put the 3,300 acres that's now the Forest Reserve that starts at Barrington Road and goes to 59. And that was planned and zoned. And then in 1968-69, that he got himself into some financial straits because he had too many projects going. He had one in New Brunswick and he had one in Rockville, Maryland. New Brunswick was right out of Princeton, right there. And I went to see them because I wanted to see what quality he did. It was a beautiful job, retirement communities. So we would have had a Huntley long before a Huntley. It would have been there. But he needed the money, and the Barringtons were still angry. They did not want that land to go that way. That was the second time they had stopped us. The first time was when the land was being considered for the Fermi Lab. We were the last three. Yeah, we were
forgot about
yes.
that.
We would have been. Yeah, we would have had Fermi because that site they liked very much. But the Barringtons said no way. So the Barringtons were still trying to cut us off, and it was funny. So they prevailed upon the chairman of the county board at the time, who was Richard Ogilvie, to sell the land, to buy the land, and he offered Cortese cash. And between county money and federal money, which they got in for open space, that's how they made that forest reserve. So unlike most of the forest reserve in Cook County, our forest reserve, at least that portion of it, is totally within the confines of the village. They left a few acres, around 59, in manufacturing, around the intersection. One day in 1978, a guy walked in. Didn't look very imposing, short, thin. And he sat down and said, "Hi, I'm Bob Niederlander." And I said, "How do you do?" And he said, "I build outdoor theaters, and I want to build in your town." And I said, "I've never been in outdoor theater, but show me some of your theaters." Well, he rattled off some of the theaters. And he said, besides that, we run quite a few theaters in New York City and in L.A. So I knew he had the money. Then I discovered that they were brothers, and they all had a different part of the action.
Oh.
One did the booking, one did, and they were very frugal people. And so I said, "That sounds like a marvelous idea." I said, "We don't have anything out in the suburbs like that." I said, "How many acres do you need? Where do you need them?" And he said, "Well, I have a young man who went to the farmer who lives now in Elgin, and he can't seem to get the farmer to sell his land." And I said, "Well, I don't generally do that." I said, "I have a very firm commitment that the farms stay farms until the farmers sell." And I said, "That's why you'll see pockets all over Hoffman Estates with land that the farmers are on. There's no need for them to pay the village taxes. They're not using the services." And I said, "I don't believe in involuntary annexations." I said, "However, this is on the fringe. I will send your young man into me, and I'll talk to him, see what's going on here." The guy was an absolute Oklahoma. He wore a raccoon coat.
Oh, a wild man. Like off the wall.
Yeah, totally off.
Everything for impression.
Well, no, he was just theatrical.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And this car, and I go, "Oh my God!"
No wonder.
Yeah. And I felt sorry for the Nederlanders because they, So I said, "I'll tell you what. I'll make one trip into Elgin, and I will talk to them." So I did, and I sat down. We didn't talk business in the beginning. We talked about my time on the farm and the various farms I'd been on, and what I did, and the milking I did, and then we talked about chickens and pigs and all the things that I'd done when I was on the farm. And finally, I broached the subject and said, "Do you really want to sell your land?" They said, "Oh yeah, but not to him."
Oh, really?
Yeah, made it very plain, not to him. And they said, "Well, do you know what his client will do with it?" And they said, "Yeah, we think so." And I said, "Well, maybe, we should tell you a little bit about what's going to happen." And they said, "Oh, that sounds good." Yeah. I said, "Well, I don't want to know how much you're getting. I'm leaving now." Okay? and they concluded their sale. And they, as I recall, they had a little piece of property behind that, so we gave a roadway to them so that they could still have access to that. And then we got into the hearings. 18 of them. Oh yeah, the Barringtons were not about to let that happen. I mean, they took pictures of people urinating on lawns. They had, I mean, they were convinced that their homes, which were a quarter-mile away, were going to be inundated by
They were
all
going
these.
to walk a quarter of a mile to their house to urinate,
Yes.
and walk a quarter of a mile
Right,
back.
you got it. Or when they were gone to Florida for the winter, they were going to be robbed blind. I mean,
It wasn't even opened in the winter.
It was just, it was so funny that there were times when you would have to leave the room.
They were
and
grasping
just get,
straws.
oh yeah. And now you have to understand that these are people who have been capable of stopping hearings because a comma was not inserted in the legal notice. That's literally what they have been known to do. And so we were patient, and they got what they wanted. They got a covenant from the builder, and I said, don't do this. Please don't do this. Don't do this. And we're now coming out of the covenant with Sears. Height covenant. I mean, I cried when they informed me they had cut a deal. I said, no, please don't do that. So they did, in order to get their building, and they did. They were environmentally. I said, I don't want blacktop, so they only did a perimeter blacktop, and where you parked your car was all crushed stone. I said, I want you not to disturb the wetlands, and they didn't. They kept the wetlands. I said, I want you to make sure that we know a month or two ahead of time who will be here. So Dick Williams, our corporation counsel, who's still here, was the only. He used to get kidded among his home rule attorneys. He said, you're the only one who has to read Rolling Stone.
Tell us if you had anything to say about the name of Poplar Creek.
No, that they chose the name because that is Poplar Creek. They wanted it to be environment.
The wetland area
environment.
is right next to Poplar
Yes.
Creek, and that's why they called it that. It's no longer there. What is there now?
On part of the, well, that land is open now. Part of it is Marriott. The deal to knock down the creek was done by Mayor O'Malley when Sears came in, and Sears demanded that they be given the right to knock it down. I think after they knocked it down, they discovered that it was a wrong thing to do.
It was such an asset to the area.
Yeah, and
It would have been a nice advertising tool for them too.
yeah, it was not a good decision. He did not tell me he had made that deal until after it came in on the contracts, and I went, oh, well, that nice. I went in and I said,
What were you thinking?
anyways,
It was nice on so many levels. It was
yeah,
nice
well, the
for
graduations
the
were held there, and
entertainment, the community.
yeah,
I mean,
it was a
think
community
of all the
asset.
community things.
And the funny part about it was that the majority of young adults who were hired on were Barrington kids. So the irony of that was just never escaped me. I said,
Sure, they wanted to get away from home.
well, no, I mean there was money to be made, and they learned how to do crowd control. And Lou Raisin, who still is in the area, Lou happened to be part of the consortium that works with the Chicago Theater now, and Nederlanders bought the Schubert, so they own the Schubert. So they're still in the area.
Yeah.
And if we could find, if I could convince them to do a venue out here, and we need to do something again. I keep on telling. I told Michael, I said, get Lou out here and get him to invest. I said they could do a smaller venue than we had before. You don't get to do 20,000 people. And
Is that
Mike
what it was?
never
20,000?
interested. Yeah. Mike was never interested. I mean, we had some wonderful the night that Pavarotti was there, it was as though he were in your living room, and I was at the top of the hill. It was wonderful. Bette Midler was, Lena Horne.
The acoustics and everything.
Yes.
So good.
Yes. So anyway, that's how the creek came to be.
Okay.
We used to call it the creek.
You mentioned when you were on the school board that there was one farmer that was on the board.
Yeah, and I don't remember his name because he left
Okay.
about 6 or 8 months after I came on. I'll think of it afterwards.
Was it Paul?
Yeah, you're going back to 1965,
Yeah.
my friend.
Do you
There's been
remember
a lot of water under the
Was
bridge.
it Paul England?
I think it was.
Oh, really?
It was.
He wasn't really a farmer.
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was.
Paul Engler?
Yes.
You talking about the same Paul Engler who was that managed who's he called?
Rathje's farm?
Rathje's farm?
Yes, he was the farm manager. He was the farmer.
Yeah, but okay.
Farm manager. Well,
All right. Got it.
Adolf Link was still alive. I have 2 of his pictures.
Do you really?
Yes,
Someday we may come and take a picture.
I have 2.
Yeah,
His
I'd
pictures.
like to have a video of as many pictures as I could of his.
do you want to speak about Harper College and all?
There were people who were interested in the junior college issue because we had nothing out here, and so this came about because of Eugenia. She's considered the mother of the junior college.
Who's that?
Here in-
Who's that?
Would you give full names?
Eugenia Chapman.
Thank you.
We in those days, there was a system that really needs to be reinvented. In a legislative district, state legislative district, there used to be 2 of one party and 1 of another. And it depends on the district. There might be 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, or vice versa. But anyways, and so that you always had someone you could go to that was of your party. We don't have that now, and I think that is a waste. And I think one of Pat, though I like many of Pat Quinn's, who is now the lieutenant governor's ideas, that idea, which was his and which was successful, was not good. Was not good. And everybody fell for it, and because it was going to save money. Never saved a cent. And it dislocated a lot of people from party affiliation. And while I don't think party affiliation is what it is now, I don't think it's being worked correctly or by the people who have the party or the citizens at heart in many instances. I'm not a twofer person. You have to understand. I think if you have 1 seat, no matter what it is, elected seat, that's enough. And I may like you very much, but I still don't think you should have 2 seats. I'm a person who, the first thing I want to know if I interview you, have you done your homework? If you haven't done your homework, I don't want to see you. Because you haven't invested anything in this. So why should I bother with my time or energy if you haven't invested anything? And I think it's important that people understand that. So, how shall I phrase it?
Just hold it. Do you want to change tapes?
No, not yet. I got about 20 minutes. I think about 20 minutes.
Eugenia and Jenny and I trailed around Jenny McDonald because the Constitutional Convention had hearings all over in 1968-69, and I was interested in the convention and in the change in the Constitution because of that 5% cap limit on bonded indebtedness and a couple of other things that I noticed. And so I kind of trailed around, and at one point I said to Jenny McDonald, I said, your responsibility after this convention will be to run for the state legislature. And she looked at me and she said, oh no. So of course, when she was thinking about it, she called me and she said, I'm thinking, and I said, I told you, in order to make that Constitution work, you got to be there to see to see its fruition. And so when the system was set up, they were women legislators, and they were one was of each party, and I could talk to either one of them because there were so few of us. So out of that grew a discussion, and Eugenia had some people meeting, and we sat down and we said, we really need to think about college and how can we do it. We're all working families. We don't have the kinds of money. So out of that came the idea that we needed a community college, and those of us in each of the townships took the petitions, and in fact, Sunday I think I was one of the few people who had, besides Jess and Nicholas, Jess and I were there, who had been circulators of the petitions to form the college. Gerald was there, and he talked about Eugenia, and that was nice. It was good to see Jerry. And but we
Gerald Chapman.
Yeah, Gerald Chapman, her husband, and we were successful. We convinced the communities that the college needed to be established, and we got good people. Jessalyn Nicholas was the person that I backed. She lived in Inverness. She was a business person, and she worked hard. Oh, God. Those are the years when she made everybody go, look, you got to look at this. You got to experience this before we do it. And she was lamenting that nobody does that anymore. She said, I think they make some poor decisions because they don't personally get out to do this. Mm-hmm. But so that's how Harper came to be. The location of Harper caused some consternation among some of us. Our first choice was where Roosevelt University currently is, because Union Oil had put that on the market.
Oh, is that when they did that then?
And I have that was the third time that Hatcher blocked it. He said, nothing in my town will go for that junior college.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember that. I'd forgotten that.
Add that to your list.
I've forgotten that, because what?
And now
the site that they're
are so
on.
proud of the
No,
fact
the
that they
site
have
that they're
Roosevelt.
on. The site that they're on was owned by one of the Jane brothers, and he was deep into trouble with the IRS over his
Meaning
taxes.
the Harper that we have today?
Yes, the site
Okay.
we have today, and he had a stable there,
Oh, okay.
and had very unsavory. His car blew up, and he wasn't in it, but a young woman who worked at and boarded a horse at the stable, was killed. I was objecting because we were going to get the money, the tax money that we were raising for this college was going to get him out of hock with the IRS, and I didn't like this at all. They said, "Be quiet." I said, "No." What people don't remember, we had an organizer who was working with us when we were putting Harper together, and his name was Roy Murray, M-A-R-A-I-S, and he was from Michigan. And privately, all of the women who were behind the college were called Harper's Harlots.
Okay. All nice.
Well, I mean, we had a
was a little
good,
fun.
we had to have some once in a while.
That's how you knew that they were in the same club.
Yeah.
If they
That's
knew
true.
the
Yes.
secret password.
Yeah. Because we had wanted the William Rainey Harper name because of the affiliation with the University of Chicago and his background as an educator, and the fact that this was a man who stood for education, and we wanted to clearly make a statement.
So it started out with that name from the get-go.
Yeah, among those of us
Who knew you were going to have a college
right
on that site.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Now,
But what happened was, instead of having an architect that understood Illinois weather, they hired an architect from Texas who had never been through an Illinois winter. And that's why the winds I mean, that's why you freeze your ass off between the time you get out of the car and you get in the buildings.
Right.
And no, I went, what, from Texas? What? But I have another rule that says, once you get somebody there, unless they really are screwing up, you stand back and you let them do it. You don't go tell them what to do. So I thought, I wouldn't have hired a Texas architect, but
when the concept of the community college began, and when
I'm glad you used the word community, because that is exactly what we zeroed in on.
Yeah, not junior college, community college. Did you have the property immediately, or did the college start first and then the property was acquired?
The college started first, and then they bought the property.
And the college was started behind Elk Grove High School?
That was the first. No, that was yes. That was
first campus.
The first classes, because we knew we had to start the classes, and before it would take 3 or 4 years to get the
You had
buildings
them
up and
where?
running.
And mobile classrooms?
Yes,
To the east side of the high school?
East or south?
Forest
Or
View.
south?
Oh, Forest View?
Forest
Oh,
View.
Overnight Forest View and Elk Grove.
okay.
Yeah,
I
both
thought-
Forest View and Elk Grove.
And
both.
Elk Grove.
Both.
Oh, okay.
Because I can remember seeing the mobile
Yeah,
units
yeah,
at Elk
okay.
Grove.
Yeah,
uh,
both.
Locations. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they started building
Mhm.
the actual buildings on the property at
That's it.
Roselle and Algonquin Road.
Correct.
I have just a couple questions. I want to make sure it
Okay.
stays on this same tape. What was the house number and the street number for the house that you were in Hoffman Estates? You're not there now, right?
No, 2065 Carlton.
2065.
Carleton.
All right.
You don't want a picture of it now.
Well,
I'll give you a picture of it as
Well,
it was.
I'm going to throw it on there, and I'll say 2003. We'll have another one to follow. And then Gene's name, the salesman for Hoffman.
Trying to Hoffman, not Hoffman. Oh.
Okay, it
It
was.
starts with an R.
R.
With an R.
All right, and Mrs. Swanson, the kindergarten teacher person. How do you reach her?
Let's see how I reach.
What was her first name? And then the other was how to reach
Let me look at my old files. I'll find this Mrs.
Phyllis
Swanson's name.
Seaver.
She's deceased. Her
Okay.
husband's still alive, and he's remarried.
Okay. All right. Well, all right.
In
You-
fact, I'll ask
whatever
Buzz
you want.
Hoffman. He'll remember because he'll ask his dad.
Here you go.
Yeah. See, Sam had already killed himself when I moved in,
Mhm.
and I only knew Jack. And then the guy who, when they went to Hoffman Rosner, they started out as F&S, father and son.
Okay.
And then they became Hoffman Rosner when Rosner came in as a partner. And then they went to Hoffman Homes when that guy came in, when the bank brought that guy in. And now Buzz is Lakewood. And they just built the building. Their home office now is back in Hoffman. Right on.
Come full circle.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice for
Buzz
you,
is back
isn't
at
it?
It
them.
is.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Okay. I was just, I mean, you knew the man's name as a salesman. I
Yeah.
thought it was
Yeah.
kind of interesting that I don't
I'll get
remember.
it. Yeah.
I don't remember
Well,
the
he
name of
stayed
any of the people that sold
around
my
a long
house.
time. I knew a lot of the salesmen because I used to walk in. I was interested in the housing. I would critique the builders' houses, and some builders didn't care for that very much. But
Really?
there was a builder one day. He started yelling and screaming, "No woman should have it!" Oh, never mind. Anyways, he built a starter house. Okay. Give me a pen. I'll show you what he did. Oh, I was so frustrated when I saw this. This is a starter house. Okay. This is the house. Okay. Bathroom is here. bedroom here, bedroom here, hallway, master bedroom. This is a ranch, okay? Washer, dryer here. Opens into the family room, okay? Living room here, okay? The kitchen is here. Dining area is here, okay? Then it's extended a little bit. Living room is here. Garage is here. Okay. Patio door here, okay? No door outside of the kitchen, okay? Not even here. So there was no patio door here.
So if we
there was
had-
a door to the garage here, okay? Now, little kid in the backyard had to come through these patio doors, through the family room, down the hall. I said, I hope you intend to put yellow carpeting in the great room. And he said, why? And I said, because somebody's going to piddle before they get to the bathroom. I said, did you ever raise kids? He said, well, yeah, but, and I said,
Well, you weren't home while they were being
I
raised.
said, you know what? How do you get the groceries in and the garbage out of that kitchen? I said, you throw it out of this back window? Or you throw it out of this back window? I said, because there is no way to get the garbage out except going into the great room. I said, the other thing is, I would love to walk into this house because what's going to happen is this pile of clothing will be the first thing you see because you're walking straight in and you're looking at the washer dryer. And I said, with a family, there's always diapers or something. I said, that is the lousiest layout I've ever seen in my life.
Unreal.
But I mean, I love houses. I mean, I don't care how big they are or anything. I just love housing. And for a brief period of time, I worked as a buyer, prospective buyer, and I shopped housing for one of the builders of the area. And I worked for one of the witches. I mean, she was a real witch. And so I know what they can be when you've got a real rich for a boss. But I loved the job because I,
That would be
yeah,
fascinating.
it was fascinating because I got to talk about the, what they did with the bathrooms and what they did with the kinds of hardware they used and everything. It was really, for me, it was fun.
Well, and
It was a fun
my
job.
first thought was, if there's a fire back here, or
In the
there's
kitchen.
a fire here,
Yeah.
you know,
How do you get
how
out?
would you get out? That's, I guess you go out the window.
Well, that's women versus men.
Men architects.
Yes.
They never ran it by. They never ran it by.
Who was the Phyllis you were talking about before?
Which Phyllis?
The Phyllis.
Schlafly.
Oh, tell the story again, will you?
Well, though told you, Ginny McDonald and Eugenia and I were friends. And this was early in Phyllis's tenure, but Ginny called me up from Springfield one day. She said, go to my office, have my secretary give you the file that I have on ERA. She said, I want you to be really boned up on the latest stuff. And I said, why? She said, well, I can't make a speaking engagement. And she said, it's being held at the VFW hall in Palatine. But she said, you probably get a lot of people from Harper coming. She said, because Phyllis Schlafly's going to be. Now, I didn't know who Phyllis was, because I was working on other stuff with ERA, and I wasn't real into the politics of the whole thing. So I got the file, and I'm going, oh, this woman, she bakes bread. I bake bread. Okay. So I had never seen her, heard her. So I dressed the suit like I always did. I always
Very
wore suits, and
professional.
and showed up that night. I walk in, and there are gun supporters handing out things at the door, and I mean, all the nuts were there. And I brought her a loaf of bread, and I presented it to her, and she glared at me. So we started in, and it just so happened that that was the week that 60 Minutes was traveling with her.
Whoa.
And we started in. And she did the same, the stuff that she always did about bathrooms being unisex. And I looked at her and I said, Phyllis, the anatomy of the two sexes needs other facilities. I said, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. I said, I think that people, when they only have one bathroom in a house, manage it. So I think if they have a unisex bathroom someplace else, they'll figure it out. She didn't have a sense of humor. I mean, the whole thing. She was just, and I had fun. I really had fun, and the audience had fun, because I figured that she was coming off the typical, I'm right, you're wrong, the whole world's against me, that siege mentality that the conservatives get into, and that the only way to handle this was to handle it with a bit of humor, and with the fact that people don't need to be told certain things. They know. You don't have to preach to them. And so we finished, and I got a rousing hand, and the cameraman came up to me and he said, in all the week we've been with her, you're the only person who has really managed to do it.
I bet they were loving it.
They were.
So do you see Phyllis every once in a while?
Yeah, every once in a while I see her in Springfield. She has her eagle. She didn't have the eagle form then. She was just forming it then, and they're made up of these, these sometimes intelligent, not usually. Usually they're farm wives or wives from small towns, and she gets them all worked up about the fact that people, you're going to be destitute when you're old, and nobody's going to take care of you, and all of that. She piles on the fears of people, and uses that to make them believe that the proponents of freedom want you to be cut loose from the community, and that these are people who have no heart, and all they're interested in is bra burning and free love and all of that stuff. They do. She makes them dehumanized, and sometimes it sells and sometimes it doesn't. Depends on who. So I had fun. Once in a while I see her in Springfield. Yes, she's still down in Springfield. She still has a group of Springfield legislators, unfortunately, that support her. She's from Alton. And what can I say? We've got all kinds of unsophisticated people who run for public office and get there.
Why is it that Hoffman Estates changed their numbering and their street numbering? Or street naming and street numbering system?
Because there were about 5 different numbering systems in the town, and the fire department and the police department had a hard time after we grew to a certain point, and we said we better standardize everything, and so we standardized it. And it was traumatic for 6 months or so, and then, but it needed to be done for safety reasons. It wasn't done for cosmetic reasons. It wasn't done for anything else.
So your address of your house, it was its original numbering and original naming?
Yeah.
So yours was an
mine was
area
built-
that stayed the same?
Yeah, there were some that stayed the same, and there were some that changed. Not everybody changed. And what we did as a village, we sent a complete computer printout to the taxing groups, to every taxing group, to the ComEd, to everybody that provided service. So it was all done at once.
You handled all that.
Yes,
for
we
them.
handled all of
So
that.
all the people
All they had to
didn't
do is
have to-
convert it?
Right. Yeah, we handled all of
Very
that.
nice.
Yeah. When we tried to get Schaumburg to agree that we'd exchange street names so that street names wouldn't be too similar in the two towns, but that blew away a few years ago, and it's gone. in the beginning, in the
It's
majority
less of a problem now because you have your own zip code, correct?
We don't have our
You
own
don't
zip
have your own
They're
yet?
still fighting that battle.
We're still fighting that.
Mm.
That's, and it's, doesn't make any sense.
But that's an issue with the government, with the federal
With the
government, right?
federal government,
Not
correct.
The
Postal
villages
union.
or-
Those unions really,
Mhm.
it's a union issue, partly.
Wow,
Yeah.
really?
Yes. The way I found out that the unions had a lot of clout is when we went north and began building the houses north of Palatine Road, the unions in the Barrington and Palatine post offices got very uptight. And they said, wait a minute, we have jurisdiction in here, and everything north of Palatine Road is going to be Barrington post office. So everybody that's north of Palatine Road lives in Hoffman Estates, it's Barrington post office.
Mm. So that's why they put down Barrington for their city name.
You have it.
So it
And
gets
then
there.
one small piece on the northeast corner of Elam,
Okay.
those houses right there,
Yeah.
have a Palatine address.
Mhm. Even though it's incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Wow.
And that's
Unbelievable.
then the unions will not back off of that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
Coming
That's
within
true.
minutes.
That's true.
okay. Well, why don't we just cut it?
Okay. Spell your last name.
Hayter.
Okay. And it's an English name.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
You should hear it.
All right.
Okay.